Hi guys, we're going to read another chapter of Dealing with Dragons. We're on chapter 10, in which Cimorene and Alianora conduct some tests and disturb a wizard. Back in the kitchen, Cimorene and Alianora quickly determined that the fireproofing spell had indeed worked. First Cimorene, then Alianora tossed a pinch of feverfew into the air and recited the spell verse, and then put a hand to a candle flame and held it there. Neither was burned at all, though Alianora claimed that the candle tickled almost as much as the eagle feather had. "How long does the spell last?" Alianora said. "I'm not sure exactly," Cimorene replied. "At least an hour, but I'll have to do some tests to pin down beyond that. I hope Kazul gets back soon. I want to see if it works against dragon fire." You're going to have Kazul breathe fire at you just to see if the spell works?" Alianora said, horrified. "What if it doesn't?" "Then I'll talk to Kazul and we'll go see Morwen, and the three of us will try and figure out what to change to make the spell work on Dragonfire too. Don't look at me like that. I'm not just going to stand in front of Kazul and have her breathe fire at me. I'll just stick out a finger the way we did with the candle." This was not enough to convince Alianora, but Cimorene was determined. "The whole point of trying this spell is to make ourselves immune to Dragonfire," she said. "If it doesn't work, I don't want to find out for the first time when one of Kazul's guests get mad and breathes fire at me, just because he doesn't like the way I cooked his cherries jubilee." Alianora had to admit this was a good point, but she was still disposed to argue. The discussion was cut short by Kazul's return. At first the dragon was more inclined to agree with Alianora than Cimorene, but after Cimorene proved her invulnerability to candle flames, lighted torches, and the fire she had built in the kitchen stove, Kazul agreed to the trial. She insisted, however, on working up to full firepower in gradual stages, and Cimorene was forced to agree. Before they began, Cimorene threw another pinch of feverfew into the air and recited the couplet again, just to be sure that the spell wouldn't wear off in the middle of the test. Then Kazul lowered her head nearly to the ground, and Alianora watched nervously as Cimorene lowered her hand, slowly into various intensities of dragon flame. Finally, Cimorene stood right in front of Kazul while the dragon breathed her hottest. The spell worked perfectly every time. "There," Cimorene said, and Kazul stopped at last. "Now we know it works. Aren't you glad?" "I'm glad," Alianora said fervently, "and I hope I never have to watch anything like that again as long as I live. I didn't dare blink for fear you'd go up in smoke while my eyes were closed." "Why don't you try it yourself?" Cimorene said mischievously. "No," Alianora and Kazul said together. "Watching you was bad enough," Alianora went on with a shudder. "I believe it works, and I don't see any reason for me to have to test it. Besides, I've done more than enough fire breathing for one day," Kazul added. "I'm starting to get overheated." "All right. If you don't want to, you don't have to," Cimorene said. "If we're all done, I better go tidy up." Alianora stayed to help Cimorene finish cleaning up the traces of the spell, and by which time she had calmed down considerably and was very nearly her usual self again. Cimorene gave her a pouch full of dried feverfew before she left, and made her recite the couplet to activate the spell several times, just to be sure she had memorized them correctly. "Remember, you only have to repeat the first half of the verse to get the spell going now that it's set up. Can you do it?" "It's only 2 lines, and they rhyme," Alianora said, laughing. "How could I forget that? My memory isn't that bad." "Maybe not, but say it anyway," Cimorene said. Alianora laughed again, and did so. At last she set off into the tunnels, and Cimorene went back to the main cave to see what Kazul and Roxam had found out about the caves of fire and night. Kazul was somewhat out of temper, and Cimorene thought privately that she had been telling the truth about getting overheated. Rather than annoy the dragon further, Cimorene asked if she could read the book that Kazul had borrowed from Morwen. "It's in the treasure room," Kazul said. "Read it there, and I hope you see something in it that we didn't." Cimorene nodded and picked up her lamp, and hurried off before Kazul could change her mind. The book was lying near a pile of sapphires next to an ornate gold crown. She picked it up and went over to the table, which was large and very sturdy, because it was intended for counting piles of gold and silver coins. She sat down and read. It was even drier and duller than Kazul had said. There were a great many mayhaps and perchances and wherefores, strung together in long, involved sentences that compared the strange and wonderful things in the caves to obscure philosophical ideas and odd customs from places Cimorene had never heard of. After a few pages, Cimorene put the book down, and went out and got a quill pen, an ink pot, and some paper. so that she could write down the things she thought were important. She didn't want to have to read A Journey Through the Caves of Fire and Night more than once. For the next 3 days, Cimorene spent bits of her spare time in the treasure room, taking notes on the book. It took her a long time, because she could never manage to read it for more than a little while without getting so bored that she nearly fell asleep. Her persistence gained her several pages of notes about the caves, but nothing that seemed as if it might be of particular interest to wizards. Alianora came to see her a few days later, looking very cheerful. "It worked," she announced as she came into the library where Cimorene was going over her notes. "Caradwell's gone. Thorindale rescued her, just the way you said he would." "Good," Cimorene said. "I'm glad something is going right." "What's the problem?" Alianora asked, seating herself on the other side of the table from Cimorene. "This," Cimorene said, waving at the paper-covered table. "Kazul is sure that the key to what the wizards are after is somewhere in that dratted book she borrowed from Morwen. I copied out everything that looked interesting, but none of it seems like it would be anything that a wizard could care about." "How do you know that?" Alianora asked curiously. "I don't," Cimorene said. "I'm just guessing. That's the problem." "Oh." Alianora picked up a sheet of paper nearest to her and frowned at it. "What on earth does this mean?" Cimorene looked at the page that Alianora was holding. "Thus these caves of fire and night are, in some sense, indivisible, whereas the caves of chance are, by contrast, individual, though it is preposterous to claim that these descriptions are true of either group of the caves in their entirety." "That's one of the bits I copied word for word. The whole book is like that, and I think it means that if you have a piece of some magic from the Caves of Fire and Night, you can use it in a spell, as if it were the whole thing." "And I can see why you wouldn't be sure," Alianora said. "Do you think it would help you figure things out if you stopped for a while?" "I have stopped," Cimorene pointed out. "Or did you have something more specific in mind?" "I'm almost out of feverfew," Alianora said, looking down at the table. "I was hoping you'd come with me to pick some more up." "You're almost out?" Cimorene asked in surprise. "How did that happen?" Alianora shifted uncomfortably. "I've been working that fireproofing spell every hour or so for the past few days. Warag has been getting more and more unpredictable, and I don't feel comfortable otherwise. Halana was visiting yesterday when he came in the middle of the afternoon, and he was roaring and dripping little bits of flame as he breathed. She was terrified, and I don't blame her. If it weren't for the spell, I'd have been scared to death." "What's the matter with him?" "I don't know. He doesn't tell me anything about dragon politics or wizards or what he's getting so worked up about. He's not like Kazul." Cimorene frowned, considering. "Maybe Kazul will have some idea what's bothering him. I'll ask her this evening. In the meantime, let's go get that feverfew. You're right when you say that I could use a break." "Oh, good," said Alianora in tones of considerable relief. "I've never picked herbs before, and I'm not sure what feverfew looks like. I don't know what I would have done if you'd said you wouldn't come." Cimorene put her notes down, and got 2 wicker baskets and a small knife from one of the storage rooms. "Up or down?" Alianora asked as they left the cave. "Up," Cimorene said. "The other way is the ledge I told you about, and I wouldn't be surprised if bits of it are still invisible." The path through the pass of silver ice twisted and turned past the openings of the other dragons' caves. Most of the rocks around the caves had scorch marks. Cimorene and Alianora didn't see much growing along them. "At this rate, we'll have to go nearly all the way to the enchanted forest to find some grass. Much less some herbs," Alianora complained. "Wait a minute," Cimorene said. "Look over there, through that crack in the rocks. Doesn't that look like something green?" Alianora's eyes followed Cimorene's pointing finger. "Yes," she said without enthusiasm, "it looks green." The rock that Cimorene had indicated was a large boulder at the bottom of a steep slope. The slope was covered with gravel and looked as if it would be impossible to climb down without skinning a knee or elbow at the very least. The boulder itself was in 2 pieces, with just enough space in between them for someone to squeeze through, provided that someone was not very large. "Come, let's get a better look," Cimorene said. She walked to the edge of the slope and wrapped her skirts tightly around her legs. She sat down with the basket in her lap and slid down the slope, raising an enormous cloud of dust that looked like an avalanche in process. When she reached the bottom safely, she stood up and brushed out her skirt. The dust was so thick that she could hardly see, and when she tried to call to Alianora, she coughed so hard she could barely speak. "Cimorene, are you all right?" "It's just the dust," Cimorene said in a muffled voice. She had taken out her handkerchief to put it over her mouth and nose to keep the dust out. It wasn't perfect, but it helped a great deal. Come on, it's your turn. Are you sure we shouldn't just go around? Stop stalling. It isn't that bad. That's what you say, Alianora muttered. But she wrapped her skirts around her, clutched her basket, and slid down the slope. She made even more noise than Cimorene had. When she got to the bottom, she was coughing and choking, and Cimorene handed her a handkerchief. They waited a moment while the dust settled. Crawling through the split boulder was easier than they expected. The crevice was wider than it had looked from the path, and at the bottom of the crack was so full of dust and dead leaves that it was almost flat. Cimorene and Alianora had to walk in single file, and there was one or two spots that they had to turn sideways in order to get through. But it was not very difficult. On the other side of the boulder, the two girls found a lush green valley. It was bowl-shaped and not very large, but flowers and grasses stood waist-high between random clumps of bushes that dotted the valley floor. A squirrel, which had been sunning itself on the ledge near the entrance, leaped for a small tree as Cimorene and Alianora approached. "My goodness," Alianora said, looking around with wide eyes. "This place looks as if nobody but us has ever been here. There's not even a scorch mark on a rock." Cimorene blinked. Alianora was right. Lichens covered the weather-grayed rocks that rose through the valley, and small plants grew in cracks and crevices that also showed no sign of Dragonfire's touch. "That's odd," Cimorene commented. "Why?" Alianora said. "Those mountains aren't tall enough to keep a dragon from flying over. They're in the middle of the dragon's territory. So why haven't the dragons been here? They usually keep a close eye on everything that belongs to them." "Maybe they have been here, but they never found anything to breathe any fire at," Alianora said. "Well, I'm going to ask Kazul about it when I get back," she said, wading into the grass. "Why don't you take that side and I'll look over here? We'll cover more ground that way." "First you'd better show me what I'm looking for," Alianora said apologetically. "I'm afraid I couldn't tell feverfew from carrots if there was a dragon chasing me and my life depended on it." Cimorene nodded and they started off. They hadn't gone far when she found a patch of the white button-shaped flowers she was looking for. "Here," she said, showing them to Alianora. "This is feverfew. The younger plants are best, but the ones that haven't blossomed yet." Alianora studied the leaves and flowers with care. "I think I'll recognize them now." They cut some of the plants, leaving those that were blooming. "You find the next patch," Cimorene said, and they started off again. "Let's try over there," Alianora said, pointing. They found several more patches of feverfew, and gradually their baskets began to fill. "I think this should be enough. Unless you think—" "Cimorene!" Alianora hissed, clutching Cimorene's arm. "There's someone behind that bush." Cimorene turned, and a dark line snaked through the grass where something large had bent and broken the plants in passing. "You're right," she said, and started forward. Alianora hung back, still holding Cimorene's hand. "You're not going to go look, are you?" "How else are we going to find out who it is?" Cimorene asked, reasonably. She shook off Alianora's hand, and quietly walked over to the clump of bushes and peered around it. Alianora followed with evident reluctance. A man in blue and brown silk robes was crouched on the other side of the bush, with his back to Cimorene. He was stuffing saw-edged purple leaves into a linen bag the size of Cimorene's hand. His hair was brown, and on the ground beside him lay a polished staff. "Antrell?" Cimorene asked in surprise. The man snatched up his staff and straightened as if a bee had stung him. It was indeed Antrell, and he looked not at all pleased to see her. He stuffed the linen bag into his sleeve and said, "Princess Cimorene, what brings you here?" "I was about to ask you the same thing," Cimorene said. "Wizards go where they wish, answering to no one," Antrell said, waving his free hand loftily. "Maybe outside the Mountains of Mourning they do, but around here they have to check with the dragons first," Cimorene said. "You know nothing of the matter," Antrell said, looking very put out. "Cimorene," Alianora's tone was doubtful. "You know this person?" "I'm sorry, I should have introduced you. This is Antrell, one of the wizards I told you about. Antrell, this is Princess Alianora of Duchy Tour-on-Marche. At this point, she's the princess of Dragon Warhog." Alianora curtsied, murmuring something polite and inaudible. Antrell, who had stiffened in surprise when he realized that Cimorene was not alone, relaxed visibly. "Warhog's princess? That's all right, then. Though he really shouldn't have sent you." "But Warhog didn't— Ow!" Alianora said. The ow was because Cimorene had hastily kicked her ankle to keep her from telling Antrell too much. Didn't what? Aunt Rose asked, frowning suspiciously. Didn't know you were going to be here, Cimorene said. Well, of course he didn't know, Aunt Rose said, looking annoyed. That's the whole point, after all. Cimorene would have very much liked to ask him what the point was, but she was afraid it would make him suspicious again. I don't understand, she said, instead, batting her eyes at him. Of course not, Antrell replied in a condescending tone that made Cimorene's teeth hurt. But it doesn't matter. I'm not annoyed at you. I'm so glad, Cimorene murmured. Antrell gave her an oily smile. In fact, there's no need for you to tell Warog at all that you met me here. I wouldn't dream of it, Cimorene said with perfect truth. Excellent, Antrell said. Then may I escort you both back to the path? Alianora looked hopefully in Cimorene's direction. But we can't leave yet, Cimorene said, opening her eyes very wide. We haven't picked any cornflowers or daisies. Behind her she heard Alianora making a smothered, choking noise, as if she was trying very hard not to laugh. Daisies? Antrell said, in a flat, incredulous tone. You want to stay and pick daisies? Cimorene nodded vigorously. And cornflowers and flax and all sorts of things, she said, waving the flowers blooming all around. They look so pretty in a bowl of water in the kitchen. I'm sure you're right, Antrell said, and he looked as if he would have liked to object, but couldn't think of anything to object to. Perhaps I could help you, he said, reluctantly. Oh, we wouldn't dream of keeping you, Cimorene said. Antrell was very clearly reluctant to leave the two girls in the valley, but Cimorene did not give him much of a choice. After another minute or so of conversation, the wizard was forced to go, and he did not do so using a vanishing spell, but trudging away on foot. Cimorene watched him until he was out of sight among the bushes, wondering whether or not he had some sort of special reason not to use spells in the valley, or whether he simply didn't know the right spells to make himself vanish. That's a relief, Alianora said. Why did you insist on staying when it was so obvious he wanted us to leave? I was afraid he was going to turn us into toads or something. I wanted to see what he was up to, Cimorene said, and I don't think Antrell's a very good wizard. He probably couldn't manage anything worse than a squirrel. Alianora did not appear to find this reassuring. Cimorene checked to make sure Antrell was out of sight, and then went over to the place where he had been standing and peered around the bush. At first she did not notice anything unusual. Then she saw a purplish plant oozing sap from several places where the spiky, sawed-toothed leaves had been broken off. Look at this. What is it? Alianora said. I don't know, Cimorene said absently. I saw a couple of other plants like this when we were picking feverfew, but I thought they were just weeds. Maybe it is a weed. A wizard wouldn't be sneaking into the dragon section of the Mountains of Mourning just to pick weeds. They don't even use herbs to cast spells. So what does Antrell want with this prickly-looking thing? Alianora shrugged. Maybe he needs it for something he can't do with magic. I wonder what that would be. Cimorene reached out and carefully broke off a spray of leaves. She wrapped them in her handkerchief and put the packet in her pocket. Let's go see if we can find out whether he picked anything else. Antrell had left a dark trail of bent and broken plants to mark the way he had come, so his path was easy to follow. Cimorene and Alianora searched carefully along it for some way, looking for signs that the wizard had picked other herbs. Neither of them saw any. I don't think there's anything to find, Alianora said, pushing her apricot-colored hair out of her face, and it's getting awfully warm. Have you noticed there aren't any of those purple plants along here? I'll bet that's all he wanted. Then let's leave before that wizard thinks to circle around and check what we're doing, Alianora urged. Cimorene doubted that Antrell would think of such a thing, but she nodded in agreement, and the two girls left the valley. Alianora was quiet and thoughtful for most of the walk back to Kazul's cave. Cimorene was grateful for her silence. She had a lot to think about herself. From what Antrell had said, it seemed likely that Warog was helping the wizard somehow, or at least that he had known what Antrell was looking for in the little valley. Cimorene found it difficult to imagine a dragon helping a wizard, but she couldn't say with certainty that it was impossible. And if Warog was involved with Antrell and Zeminar, then it might explain why he'd been so touchy lately. When they arrived back at the cave, Cimorene shook herself free of her preoccupation. She and Alianora unloaded their baskets and tidied the herbs in bunches hanging in the dark corner of the kitchen to dry. How long will it be before I can use the feverfew? I'm not sure, Cimorene said in a considering tone. It will take at least a week to dry thoroughly. We might be able to use it in the spell before then. The directions didn't say how dry the feverfew has to be. We could try it every day with a little pinch of leaves from one of the bunches if you'd like." Alianora nodded. "I really do need it." "I wonder if it would work without being dried," Cimorene said. She pulled a leaf off of one of the hanging plants, shredded it carefully between her fingers, and then tossed it in the air and recited a rhyme. "There, now let's light up a candle or a lamp or something." Alianora had already lit a candle and set it on the table. Cimorene moved her finger out into the flame. "I think it's working," she said, moving the rest of her hand closer. The sleeve of her dress caught fire, and Cimorene hastily pulled her hand away from the candle and slapped out the flames, while Alianora snatched up a bucket of water from beside the sink and poured it over Cimorene's arm. The fire went out, and so did the candle. Both Cimorene and Alianora got thoroughly soaked. "Oh dear," Alianora said, ignoring her soggy skirts. "Cimorene, did you burn yourself?" "No," Cimorene said, looking at her arm with a puzzled expression. "I didn't feel a thing. I thought the spell worked, but nothing caught fire when we tested it before. It must be because the feverfew is fresh instead of dried. I had hoped I'd be able to use it right away." "If you're low on dried feverfew, take some of mine," Cimorene offered. "Kazul's not particularly irritable. I only need a pinch or two in case of emergency." "Thank you," Alianora said fervently, and Cimorene turned her soggy cuffs back and went back to working on the bottled spices. That is the end of chapter 10. Next time we'll read chapter 11, in which Kazul is unwell and Cimorene makes a new acquaintance.